Hi there, I'm Derrick, and this is the story of how my sister proposed to my fiancé, right in front of our entire family, and I never even saw it coming. You think betrayal only hurts when it's loud, but sometimes it's the quiet moments, the smiles, the clapping that cut the deepest. What do you do when the people you trusted the most are the ones tearing you apart? Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below. I can't wait to hear your story. And if you feel this might touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more real, heartfelt journeys. The evening was heavy with the scent of roasted meat and too sweet wine, the kind that made you dizzy before you even took a sip. Travis's house had that cozy, curated look that tried too hard, pillows fluffed just so, candles flickering in every corner like we were about to sit for a staged family photo. Outside, the Texas air was crisp with early fall, but inside it was almost too warm, like the house was sweating beneath all the false cheer. I tried to play along, smiling when I caught my mother's watchful eye, laughing too loudly at my father's dry jokes, squeezing Marissa's hand under the table when conversation lagged. Yet even through the practiced smiles and polite toasts, I felt the crackling unease. Something in the air didn't fit, like we were all performing, but no one remembered the lines. Dinner clattered on in the way only family dinners can, half-hearted anecdotes. Someone mentioning old high school glory days, Travis charming everyone with easy jokes. He was uncharacteristically buoyant tonight, practically buzzing with some private excitement, teasing vague, big news with that sly grin he wore when he was hiding something. Marissa leaned closer at one point, whispering, "Do you know what he's up to?" I shrugged, keeping my voice light. With Travis, who knows? Maybe he's moving to another city. We can only hope. I wish I had held on to her hand tighter. After dessert, Travis stood up, raising his wine glass like a best man at a wedding no one had planned. "I just want to say," he started, voice thick with manufactured emotion, "how much it means to have all of you here. To celebrate love, to celebrate family, to celebrate beginnings." I watched, a strange prickle starting at the base of my neck, as he turned to Marissa, dropped to one knee, pulled out a small, gaudy ring box that looked like it had been fished from a clearance bin. "Marissa Crane," he said, voice steady, "will you marry me?" There was a heartbeat of pure confusion, and then, as if on cue, a scattering of polite claps, laughter, even a whoop from someone in the back. It took a few more heartbeats before it hit them, before it hit me. The wrongness of it, the grotesque absurdity. Faces shifted from amusement to horror. A few people audibly gasped. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. Marissa froze so utterly that I could feel the tremor running through her without even touching her. And me, I sat there, paralyzed, watching my life splinter in real time. The silence roared louder than any explosion could have. In the stunned vacuum, I heard the first whispers begin, a hissing confusion that spread like a stain across the room. Some were mortified for clapping. Some stared at me like I was an exhibit in a zoo, curious to see if I'd cry, if I'd scream. I didn't. I couldn't. Under the table, Marissa's hand slipped from mine. I looked down at my empty palm, then up at her, the woman I loved, the woman who was now the object of my sister's public spectacle. And in that breathless, endless moment, one truth dropped into my mind, heavier than anything I had ever known. I didn't see it coming, but now I can unsee it. The house felt colder than it should have, a slow, creeping kind of cold that seeped into the walls, into my chest. After the dinner, after the proposal, after the stunned, broken glances, Marissa and I had packed up our small lives and retreated into the silence of our apartment. But something about the air didn't settle. It shifted and stirred like a whisper I couldn't quite catch. Marissa moved through the rooms in small, careful motions, like one wrong step would shatter the fragile quiet we'd built around ourselves. I told myself it was just nerves, just exhaustion, just everything. Yet the unease clung to me stubbornly, refusing to loosen its grip. On a particularly restless evening, I wandered to the nightstand, fidgeting with the small, delicate things that anchored me. That was when I picked up my engagement ring, the one that had once felt like a promise. It sat awkwardly between my fingers, and then I saw it. A slight bend, almost imperceptible to someone who wasn't looking. But I was looking now. Once you start noticing cracks, you find them everywhere. My first instinct was denial. Maybe I dropped it. Maybe the metal had weakened. Maybe this was just another stupid accident in a long line of stupid accidents. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became that this was no accident. The band, strong and thick, wouldn't just yield like that. It had been twisted, deliberately. A slow, crushing pressure applied by someone who knew exactly how much would be enough to bend it without snapping it. I felt my mouth go dry. I needed proof. I needed to believe I was wrong. Because if I was right, then the betrayal was no longer confined to words or stares across the dinner table. It had entered my home, touched the things that mattered most. I rushed to my laptop, pulling up the home security app Marissa and I had installed when we moved in. It was meant to make us feel safe. It was meant to be a line of defense. The feed loaded, spinning lazily. I scrolled back to the night of the dinner, to the hours when the house had been empty, or when we thought it had been. For 3 hours that night, the footage was gone. Just gone, not corrupted, not a glitch, cleanly cut, like someone had known exactly how to disable it without leaving a mess. A memory flashed, Travis lingering near my bag at the dinner, his hand brushing the table, the too casual way he had excused himself during dessert. Marissa peeked over my shoulder, her face tight and pale. "You think it was him?" I didn't answer, because thinking wasn't the problem anymore, knowing was. I closed the laptop slowly, the screen's reflection warping our faces together, twisting the outlines until I wasn't sure where I ended and where the damage began. Pacing the living room, I replayed every moment, every offhand comment, every sidelong glance Travis had ever tossed my way. How many times had I shrugged them off? How many times had I convinced myself I was imagining it? It wasn't imagination anymore. It was evidence. Still, some part of me fought the conclusion, the way a wounded animal fights the inevitable. Maybe it was easier to believe in chaos than cruelty, but deep down, I knew better. I always had. I stood by the kitchen counter, sliding the bent ring off my finger. It made a soft click as I placed it down, lighter than I remembered. Everything felt lighter now, dangerously so, like one wrong breath might blow it all away. What they couldn't destroy in front of everyone, they would try to dismantle in silence. And I was done pretending not to notice. Morning crept into the house on quiet feet, wrapping the furniture and walls in a thin, gray light. Even the coffee smelled different, like it had lost some of its warmth overnight. I sat by the kitchen window, hands wrapped around the mug more for comfort than heat, staring out at a city that was waking up without knowing anything about the fractures hidden behind the doors of my life. The night hadn't erased the dread. If anything, the weight of what we had found, the bent ring, the missing footage, pressed harder against my ribs, stealing the easy rise and fall of my breath. Marissa moved silently around the kitchen, not saying much, not needing to. Some things sat too heavy for words. My phone buzzed across the table, breaking the fragile hush. A text, casual and out of place at this hour. I reached for it absent-mindedly, expecting some promotional nonsense or maybe a check-in from a distant friend, but it wasn't either of those. It was Travis. Or rather, it was a message meant for Mom that had somehow slipped into my notifications. "Making sure Derrick knows her place," it read. "Shouldn't take long." I blinked, heart tripping over itself. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, to explain itself, to be a mistake. But it stayed there, simple and damning, pulsing quietly like a wound freshly torn open. My hands moved before my mind caught up. I needed proof. I needed to hold it in my palm, to not second-guess the betrayal staring me straight in the face. I backed out to the main screen, fingers trembling, navigating back to the message thread. Gone. Deleted. Scrubbed clean as if it had never existed. The bile rose sharp and bitter in my throat. I knew what had happened. Somehow, someway, Mom had seen it, had chosen to erase it instead of facing it. No confrontation, no apology, just silence, like a cold hand closing over my mouth. The ache that bloomed in my chest wasn't new. It was old and familiar, an echo from all the times I had been brushed aside, patted on the head, told to be reasonable. But this time, it was sharper. This time, I wasn't a child too young to know better. I was a woman staring at the rot that had always been there, hidden under the good china and forced smiles. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, letting the sting of it pull me back from the edge. Memories churned behind my eyelids. Travis getting the bigger bedroom because he needed the space. Mom forgetting to pick me up from a school play because Travis had a game. Tiny cuts that I had stitched up with excuses over the years. Maybe this was my fault. Maybe I had taught them that I would always forgive, always pretend it didn't hurt. I pulled away from the window, setting my coffee down with a hollow clink. No more pretending. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the table. My eyes scanned the familiar clutter of our living room, the worn couch, the stack of unopened mail, the faint smell of Marissa's cinnamon candle still clinging to the air. If they could erase a text that easily, what else had they erased about me? The house smelled like lemon polish and something burnt under the facade of fresh cookies. Marissa and I stepped through the doorway, clutching a bottle of wine like a peace offering neither of us believed would be accepted. The air was heavy, weighted with old tensions wearing new smiles. I told myself maybe, just maybe, today would be different. Maybe bridges could be built over charred ruins if we smiled enough, played nice enough. Marissa gave me a small, brave smile, but her hand tightened around mine as Mom approached. She wore her usual polished armor, tasteful sweater set, pearls, a look that said she hadn't done anything wrong a day in her life. Her eyes flickered to the bag Marissa carried, where the edge of fabric peeked out. "Oh, you brought the dress options," she said, voice light as spun sugar. "Let's see, dear." We hadn't planned to show her. It felt like tossing a dove into a room full of knives. But refusing would only sharpen the edges already pressing into us. So Marissa carefully pulled out the soft ivory gown. Simple, elegant, hers. Mom's laugh was swift and sharp, cracking across the room. "Sweetheart," she said, shaking her head with a pitying smile. "You do know this isn't a second-hand bride sale, right?" The words hit harder than if she'd slapped her. Silence bloomed ugly between us. I saw Marissa blink rapidly, the way people do when they're trying to hold something back but can already feel it slipping. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My tongue felt too big, my throat too tight. Mom smoothed the fabric casually, oblivious, or pretending to be, to the damage already done. Around us, minor relatives shifted uncomfortably, noses buried deeper in their teacups, too cowardly to interrupt the show. We stayed just long enough to be polite, just long enough to say we tried. Later that night, back in our apartment, Marissa dug through her purse for her phone. A plain white envelope fell out instead, fluttering to the ground like a broken wing. Neither of us spoke. I picked it up, heart sinking before I even opened it. Typed neatly on a sheet of cheap paper were the words, "You'll never be one of us." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Marissa sat down hard on the edge of the couch, shoulders curled inward, the fight draining out of her like a slow leak. I read it again, slower this time, feeling the weight of every carefully chosen word meant to carve her away from me, from us. Something inside me shifted, a low rumble deep in my chest. Not grief, not fear, anger, a clean, focused kind of rage that didn't shake my hands or raise my voice, the kind that builds walls instead of bridges. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into the inner pocket of my jacket, close to my heart but not touching it. They might have chipped away at me, but they wouldn't get to carve her apart too. The brunch was supposed to be a fresh start. At least that's how my mother phrased it in the brittle, carefully worded email she sent 3 days earlier. "We just want to reconnect, rebuild, and move forward as a family," she wrote. The words sounded warm enough, but so did the sun before it scorched the fields dry. Marissa and I showed up because we still clung, foolishly maybe, to the idea that something could be salvaged. A thread, a splinter, anything that could stitch us back into a picture I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of anymore. Inside, the house hummed with cheerful music and the low murmur of voices. Smells of pancakes and bacon floated through the rooms, painting a scene so normal it almost masked the landmines beneath. Marissa squeezed my hand under the table as we found our seats. Her smile was there, but her eyes darted nervously across the room, tracing the same undercurrents I could feel. The way conversations leaned heavily toward Travis. The way my own stories were met with polite nods, but no questions. Travis was radiant today, telling some long-winded story about a conference he'd crushed. Every laugh, Every congratulatory pat on his back felt like a hammer striking my spine. I listened to them build him higher while they erased me one smile at a time. It wasn't new, but it hit different now. Marissa leaned closer, murmuring, "You okay?" I nodded, lying, because the truth would have spilled out messy and loud. "I'm fine," I whispered. And then, like a spark in dry grass, it happened. A cousin, too much champagne too early, leaned across the table, grinning wide and foolish. "You know," he said to no one in particular, "things would have been a hell of a lot easier if Travis had ended up with Marissa." The words dropped into the room like stones in water. Ripples of discomfort spread fast and wide. Someone coughed. Someone else dropped their fork. My mother pretended not to hear. I sat frozen, the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. I felt Marissa go rigid beside me. For half a second, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, without thinking, I placed my fork down very gently on the table. I looked straight at the cousin, who was now blinking rapidly, realizing the crack he had torn open. "That would have been a tragedy," I said, voice cool enough to frost over the steaming pancakes between us. A stunned silence answered me. Faces shifted, eyes darted away. The forced smiles melted off like cheap icing left out in the sun. Marissa reached under the table again, gripping my hand so tightly I felt the tremble in her fingers. I squeezed back, steady. Across the table, Travis met my gaze. There it was again, that cocky glint, that silent dare, like he was waiting to see if I would break, if I would scream or cry or run. I didn't. I let the quiet stretch between us like a noose. "You won't touch what's mine," I thought, pulse hammering in my ears. The rain started as a whisper against the windows, a soft patter that seemed almost hesitant, like even the storm was unsure if it was welcome here. I sat curled up on the couch, Marissa nearby with a book she wasn't really reading, the tension between us crackling louder than the rain. I hadn't planned to do it. It wasn't some grand scheme. It was instinct, a survival reflex honed after years of betrayal dressed up as family loyalty. Before the last brunch, I had installed a simple recording app on my phone, tucked it into my bag like a secret weapon I prayed I wouldn't need. But now, sitting here, listening to Travis's voice spilling through my headphones, I wished I hadn't been right. "You really think she'll leave him?" his friend asked, a chuckle buried under the clink of glasses. "Won't take much," Travis replied. "Just gotta show her where the better options are." I closed my eyes, the bile rising in my throat. I replayed it 3 times, each listen carving a deeper gouge into whatever hope had been left. I needed someone to hear it, someone who would finally look at me, see me, believe me. My father was in his study, the warm glow of his desk lamp pooling over papers he pretended to care about. I knocked once and entered without waiting. He looked up, surprised but not unkind. That almost broke me more than anger would have. "I need you to hear this," I said, voice low but steady. I played the recording, holding the phone between us like an offering. His face stayed still through the crackling static and Travis's smug voice. When it ended, I waited. For outrage, for defense, for anything. My father leaned back, sighed, a deep, bone-tired sound that seemed to echo through my hollow chest. "Sometimes," he said, his voice heavy and old, "it's better not to stir things up." It landed like a slap. Worse, maybe. Slaps leave marks. His words left nothing. No acknowledgement, no validation, just the quiet suggestion that survival meant silence. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the man who had taught me to tie my shoes, ride a bike, drive a car, and now taught me how easily you could turn your back on your own. Without a word, I turned and left the room. Marissa looked up as I came back into the living room. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She rose, crossed the space between us, and took my hand, squeezing it once, hard. It was enough. I pulled out my phone one last time, my thumb hovering over the file. Then I deleted it. Not because it didn't matter, but because I didn't need it anymore. I would fight back, not for revenge, for survival. The rain had stopped, but the house still felt damp, heavy with everything that hadn't been said. I sat by the window, watching the night press against the glass, the quiet so thick it seemed to buzz in my ears. Marissa was asleep in the other room, her breathing soft, steady. I envied her peace, even if I knew it was a fragile kind, borrowed from the exhaustion of fighting battles you're not supposed to fight at all. Alone, I let my mind wander back. Not to the night Travis knelt in front of her, not to the brunch where I was erased with every toast to him, but further, deeper, to the places I usually avoided. I was 10 years old again, standing by the living room window with a paper crown sliding off my head, waiting, holding onto a homemade birthday card in one hand, and the kind of hope that only kids are stupid enough to nurture past its expiration date. Mom had promised a party, promised cake, balloons, a backyard full of laughing faces, but Travis had a game, and somehow his tournament mattered more. They packed up the minivan with lawn chairs and thermoses, shuffling around me like I was an inconvenience. I watched from the porch as they drove away, my card curling slightly at the edges from the sweat of my palm. No party, no cake, no candles, just silence. The kind that settles deep in your bones and makes itself a second skeleton. That night I learned my place wasn't beside them. It was behind them. An afterthought. I blinked, dragging myself back to the present. The bruises from childhood had never truly faded. They had just sunk deeper, out of sight, making it easier for everyone, including me, to pretend they weren't there. But they were. And now they throbbed in time with the betrayal that had built up over the years, until my body felt too small to hold it. Travis could mock me, humiliate Marissa, manipulate the people who were supposed to protect us, and still walk away draped in applause. And why not? He always had. Expecting anything else from them had been the real delusion. I wasn't angry at him anymore, not really. I wasn't even angry at Mom or Dad. Anger implied expectation, and I had none left to give. I scrolled through the old family group chat, thumb hovering over messages filled with smiling emojis, recipe swaps, meaningless updates, the fake glue holding everything together. I thought about sending a message right then, tearing off the bandage with sharp final words, but no, this needed to be done right, slow, precise, clean. I stared at the screen a moment longer, feeling the weight of it in my hand. The next words I said to them wouldn't be for reconciliation. They would be for goodbye. The letter was tucked neatly under the door when I came home, as if it belonged there, waiting. Rain lashed the windows in long, frantic strokes, and for a moment I stood frozen, the envelope dangling from my fingertips like a dead thing. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was too perfect, like someone trying too hard to mimic sincerity. Travis, of course, his idea of an apology. But it wasn't really an apology. It was a confession dressed in manipulation, blaming me for making things difficult, blaming Marissa for causing tension, blaming everyone but himself. Line after line, it dripped with carefully disguised venom. If I had just been easier, more forgiving, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe I was the reason the family was falling apart. Reading it didn't hurt, it clarified. It burned away the last stubborn thread tying me to any illusion of repair. I dropped the letter onto the coffee table, letting it fall where it wanted, just like the respect I once tried to salvage from them. An hour later, the final confirmation came. A friend, someone still tangled enough with that side of the family to hear things, sent me a message. He's laughing about it, Derrick, saying you'll never really do anything, that you'll just sulk and come back like always. I stared at the words, feeling something old and useless finally crack clean down the middle. Weakness had always been their expectation of me, their comfort zone. They needed me quiet, forgiving, willing to swallow anything they shoved down my throat. Not anymore. I sat at the kitchen table, the laptop humming lowly, casting a faint blue light across the walls. The family group chat was open on my screen, a digital monument to years of pretending. I wrote carefully, deliberately, I'm done. This isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about respect. And the absence of it. I won't be part of this family any longer. Do not contact me again. No anger, no pleading. Just facts. Sharp and simple. I hit send. Almost immediately, the notifications began exploding across the screen. Calls for understanding, accusations, emotional landmines disguised as apologies. I muted the chat, then I deleted it. For the first time in months, maybe years, the apartment felt still, safe. I leaned back, listening to the rain tap against the glass, steady and relentless. They thought silence was surrender. They forgot silence could also be preparation. Spring came to Austin with the kind of quiet that didn't ask for attention. The trees wore their green modestly, the mornings smelled like rain and fresh-cut grass, and the city moved on, unaware of the silent wars that had ended behind closed doors. I moved on too, or at least I tried. The silence after I severed ties wasn't as dramatic as I once imagined. No midnight apologies, no doorstep confessions, just nothing. Like a door that had quietly clicked shut, and nobody on the other side thought to knock again. Some nights I found myself listening for a text tone that never came. Other times the stillness felt like a gift I hadn't known how badly I needed. Marissa and I got married by a lake just outside the city, surrounded by the few people who had proven their loyalty not by blood, but by choice. No grand ballrooms, no expensive photographers, no obligatory family portraits that froze smiles into place. Just a handful of real smiles, a gentle breeze off the water, and vows that didn't need microphones to be heard. It was small. It was perfect. As she slipped the ring onto my finger, I realized there was no longer a hollow ache attached to the moment. No missing pieces demanding to be filled with absent parents or wayward siblings. Just her. Just me. And the life we were building with hands that had learned how to hold each other without shaking. Later, while Marissa laughed with a few friends under a grove of oak trees, I stood by the water, thinking. I thought about Travis, how I'd heard through someone that things weren't going well for him, that he'd lost a promotion, that he spent more time at the bottom of a glass than behind a desk now. Mom, predictably, had burrowed deeper into her curated version of reality, where she was always the victim, always misunderstood. Dad had gone quieter, which almost felt merciful. And me, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. There was no swelling music, no cinematic closure, just a lightness in my chest and the understanding that not every story ends with a roaring victory. Sometimes real healing is just letting things rot where they fall and choosing not to carry the corpse with you. I turned back to Marissa, the sun catching in her hair, her head thrown back in a laugh so unguarded it made something in me ache sweetly. Maybe healing isn't loud. Maybe it's just deciding who deserves to stand beside you when you finally start again. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that peace doesn't always come from making amends or forcing a resolution. It comes from choosing yourself even when it hurts. Family is not just about shared blood, but about mutual respect, kindness, and loyalty. And sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's the bravest form of love you can offer yourself. I wonder, have you ever had to choose between your peace and the people you once called family? How did you find your strength when it felt like you had none left? I would love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. If this video touched